Blood stained the pine needles as the massive grizzly retreated into the forest. James Harrington knelt beside his German shepherd Max, hands trembling as he stroked the dog's fur. The animal had appeared from nowhere when the bear attacked, fighting with a ferocity that seemed almost supernatural. Now, examining the dog's collar, James froze. Beneath the tags he'd placed there himself was another, older tag, worn and tarnished. The inscription bore the name Max, and a date from 20 years ago. The same name, the same breed, the same distinctive white patch on the chest. But how could this be the same dog that had died in his childhood, protecting him from another? Danger he'd tried so hard to forget. How could a dog, dead for 2 decades, return in his moment of need? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin smelled of pine and coffee when James Harrington returned 3 days after the attack. His hands still shook as he unloaded his gear, the camera equipment mostly untouched since the encounter. Max trotted beside him, seemingly unaffected by what had happened, though James couldn't stop staring at the dog's collar, at the impossible tag that shouldn't exist. James, at 53, had built his reputation on getting closer to predators than any other wildlife photographer dared. His portfolio, spread across the cabin walls, told the story. Wolves in Yellowstone, tigers in India, lions in Tanzania, always predators, always too close, as if he'd been seeking out danger all these years. "You're awfully calm for a dog who fought off a grizzly," he muttered, watching Max settle by the fireplace as if it had been an ordinary hike. James poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey and pulled out his phone. 3 missed calls from Eleanor, 1 from Sarah. He ignored his daughter's call, as he had for months now, and dialed his ex-wife instead. "You were supposed to check in yesterday," Eleanor said by way of greeting. "I was about to call Michael to search for your stubborn carcass." "Something happened up there, Ellie." His voice sounded hollow even to himself. "Are you hurt? Is Max okay?" "We're fine, but—" James paused, unsure how to explain. Eleanor Pierce had been both his wife and his research partner for 15 years. The wildlife biologist had initially hired him to document her work with predator conservation. Their marriage had ended 5 years ago when James's obsession with danger had become too much for her careful, scientific mind. But what? Her voice softened, concern replacing irritation. "Can you come over? Bring your field kit?" "James, what happened? I need you to look at something on Max, something impossible." After he hung up, James knelt beside his dog, gently lifting the collar to examine both tags again. The newer one he'd made 6 months ago when he'd adopted Max from the shelter. The older one, tarnished and worn, with the same name and a date from his childhood. He ran his thumb over the engraving, memories flooding back unbidden. A summer afternoon, a young boy screaming, a German shepherd with a white chest patch standing between him and his father's rage. The sickening sound of impact. "You died," James whispered to the dog, who watched him with intelligent eyes. "I buried you behind our old house in Michigan. So how is your tag here?" Max whined softly, pressing his head against James's hand. Eleanor arrived an hour later, her truck bouncing up the gravel drive. At 50, she remained striking, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical braid, her movements precise as she carried her equipment inside. Despite their divorce, they'd maintained a fragile professional relationship, connected by decades of shared work and memories. "You look like hell," she said, setting down her case. "Bear attack." James gestured toward Max, who trotted over to greet Eleanor with a wagging tail. Her eyes widened. "You're telling me this dog fought off a bear? He doesn't have a scratch on him. That's part of what I can't explain." James knelt beside Max, motioning Eleanor closer. "Look at his collar." She knelt, examining the tags, her brow furrowing. 2 tags? So what? Read the dates. Her expression shifted as she registered the 20-year-old date. "I don't understand." The old tag belongs to another Max. My dog when I was a kid. Same. Name, same breed, same white patch on the chest. That's a strange coincidence, but it's not just a coincidence, Ellie. That Max died protecting me when I was 12. I watched him die, buried him myself, and now, somehow, his tag is on this dog's collar after he saved me from a grizzly. Eleanor's scientific skepticism was visible in her eyes. There must be a reasonable explanation. I've spent 3 days trying to find one, James said quietly. I'm hoping you can. Max sat between them, watching their exchange with unusual focus. His ears perked forward, as if he understood every word. Eleanor spent 2 hours examining Max, taking blood samples, checking his teeth, measuring his stride and proportions. James watched from his weathered leather chair, the whiskey bottle now half empty on the side table. As a wildlife photographer, he'd learned patience, the ability to wait motionless for hours until the perfect moment presented itself. But tonight, his leg bounced with nervous energy. Well, he finally asked as Eleanor packed her equipment. Physically, he's a perfectly normal, healthy German shepherd, she said, frowning, though his reactions to stimuli are unusual, almost anticipatory. And the tag? Eleanor sighed. It's genuinely old, James, not artificially aged. And the engraving technique matches what was common 20 years ago. You don't believe me. I believe something happened up there that you can't explain, she said carefully. But resurrection isn't the most logical conclusion. James stood, swaying slightly from the whiskey, and moved to his bookshelf. Behind a row of photography awards sat a small wooden box he rarely opened. From it, he withdrew a stack of yellowed newspaper clippings. My mother saved these, he said, spreading them on the coffee table. Never talked about them, but kept them hidden away. Eleanor leaned forward, adjusting her reading glasses. The headlines were variations of the same story. Local man found dead. Animal attack or foul play. The articles described how Thomas Harrington had been found dead in the woods behind his home, his throat torn out. Authorities suspected a wild animal attack, though some details remained puzzling. My father, James explained unnecessarily. Official ruling was a wolf attack, though no wolves had been spotted in that part of Michigan for decades. You never told me this, Eleanor said quietly, because the newspapers got it wrong. James's voice hardened. My father was a violent drunk. That night he came after me worse than ever before. Max attacked him, protecting me. There was so much blood. His voice cracked. My mother found us, saw what happened, and dragged my father's body into the woods to stage an animal attack. She told me to bury Max in the backyard and never speak of it again. Eleanor's scientific detachment faltered. James, now, my childhood. Dog's tag appears on my current dog's collar after he fights off a bear in a way no normal dog could. James met her eyes. Tell me that's just coincidence. Before Eleanor could respond, Max suddenly stood, ears alert, staring at the cabin door, seconds before a knock sounded. James frowned. Visitors were rare, especially this late. Park Ranger Michael Blackwood stood on the porch, his weathered face grim beneath his regulation hat. At 65, Michael had been patrolling these mountains longer than anyone and had become something of a friend to James over the years. Heard about your bear encounter, Michael said, stepping inside. Word. Travels fast when someone survives something like that. I had help, James said, gesturing toward Max, who was watching Michael with unusual intensity. Michael's eyes narrowed as he studied the dog. So I hear. He nodded to Eleanor before turning back to James. The way they tell it at the ranger station, your dog fought like something possessed. You believe in possession, Michael? James asked, a bitter edge to his voice. The ranger removed his hat, revealing thinning silver hair. My late wife was Blackfeet. She believed these mountains have guardians, spirits that watch over those who respect the land. His eyes drifted to Max. Sometimes, she said, those guardians take animal form to protect someone in need. Eleanor made a small sound of scientific protest, but Michael continued undeterred. Strange things happen in these woods, James. Things I can't explain. After 40 years of walking these trails, he fixed James with a steady gaze. My wife would say your encounter wasn't chance. Nothing here ever is. James hadn't planned to return to the attack site so soon, but Michael's words left him restless. The next morning, he found himself driving back toward the trailhead, Max sitting alert in the passenger seat. Eleanor had reluctantly agreed to come along, her scientific curiosity overriding her skepticism. I want to show you exactly what happened, James explained, as they hiked the familiar path. The day was clear, sunlight filtering through pine branches, but James felt a heaviness in the air that hadn't been there before. Start from the beginning, Eleanor said, recorder in hand. Despite her doubts, she approached everything as a researcher. First, I was looking for the perfect shot, James began. I'd heard about a grizzly sow with cubs in this area. Thought I could get some dramatic images if I was careful. He gestured to his camera bag. Max was uneasy all morning, which should have been my first warning. They continued along the trail, James narrating his movements from 3 days prior. Max walked slightly ahead, his behavior noticeably different from a typical hike. Alert, purposeful, occasionally looking back as if to ensure they were following. "This is it," James said eventually, stopping in a small clearing. "I set up here waiting for the bear." Eleanor surveyed the area with a scientist's eye. "Sight lines are good. Wind direction?" That was my mistake. It shifted, carrying my scent directly to her. James pointed to a section of underbrush now trampled flat. "She came through there. Faster than anything that size should move. I tried to back away, tripped over a root." His voice grew distant. "I was sure I was dead." He looked down at Max, who stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on the tree line. That's when he changed. It wasn't just protective behavior. It was... James struggled for words. It was like watching a different creature take over. He moved with impossible speed, anticipating the bear's attacks before they came. Eleanor knelt, examining the ground. There was a struggle here. She pointed to gouges in the earth, broken branches, and, most telling, dried blood on the pine. "Needles, the bear's blood," James confirmed. Max drew blood, but came away without a scratch. "That's not possible," Eleanor murmured, taking samples of the dried blood. "Neither is finding a 20-year-old dog tag on his collar," James countered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a large, curved bear claw. "This broke off during the fight. I found it embedded in a tree." Eleanor took it cautiously, her scientific mind visibly wrestling with the evidence before her. "This is..." She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Max suddenly growled, a low sound James had never heard from him before. The dog's attention was fixed on the same section of forest where the bear had emerged days earlier. "James," Eleanor's voice was tight, "we should go." Before James could respond, Max darted forward, positioning himself between them and the tree line, his posture defensive yet somehow ancient, a stance that seemed to belong to a wilder time. Through the trees, James caught a glimpse of movement. Something large, dark, watching them. Not just a bear, something aware. "That's her," he whispered. "James, please," Eleanor urged, backing away. "Whatever happened here, it's not over." As they retreated, James felt the weight of unseen eyes following their every move. Max remained between them and the presence until they were well away from the clearing, only relaxing once they reached the main trail again. "It recognized him," James said, as they hurried back toward the trailhead. "Did you see that? It wasn't just animal instinct. It knew him." Eleanor didn't answer, but her scientific detachment had given way to something James rarely saw in her: fear. In his pocket, James's fingers closed around the bear claw, seeking reassurance in its solidity. To his shock, where the claw had been, his fingers found only empty space. He frantically searched his pockets, finding nothing. The claw had vanished as impossibly as it had appeared. Back at the cabin, Eleanor's scientific resolve had returned, though with visible cracks. She spread her research journal across James's dining table, leather-bound, filled with meticulous notes and observations gathered over decades of fieldwork. "I've documented anomalous animal behavior before," she admitted reluctantly, flipping through pages. "Things I couldn't explain with current ethological models." James leaned over her shoulder, scanning entries. "You never mentioned this. Because science doesn't advance through anecdotes and unexplained phenomena." She paused at a page dated 3 years earlier. "A wolf pack near Yellowstone that changed their hunting patterns dramatically after a ranger fired warning shots near their den. Not just temporary changes, complex, coordinated behaviors that persisted for months, almost like they were executing a strategy." "Revenge," James suggested. Eleanor frowned. "I would never use that word in my published work, but privately, yes. It looked like calculated retribution." She turned another page, and here a falcon that appeared repeatedly to lead hikers away from dangerous areas just before landslides or storms. 7 documented instances. James thought of the original, Max, of how fiercely he'd protected a frightened 12-year-old boy. "Animals as guardians. I've always focused on the explainable," Eleanor said, "but my journal contains a growing collection of exceptions." She closed the book carefully. Whatever's happening with Max falls into that category. James's phone rang, a local number he didn't recognize. The voice on the other end belonged to Dr. Samuel Chen, the veterinarian in town. "Mr. Harrington, Michael Blackwood asked me to call. Said you might need my expertise with your German shepherd." An hour later, Sam Chen's truck pulled up outside the cabin. At 55, he moved with the careful precision of someone who regularly dealt with unpredictable animals. Max watched the vet's approach with unusual attentiveness. "Remarkable specimen," Sam commented, setting down his bag. "May I?" James nodded, and Sam began a gentle examination. Max cooperated with uncharacteristic patience, allowing the vet to check his eyes, teeth, and reflexes without protest. "Michael mentioned something unusual about his tags?" Sam asked. James explained, showing both tags on Max's collar. The vet examined them carefully, his expression neutral. "And you say he fought off a grizzly without injury?" "I know how it sounds," James said defensively. Sam smiled slightly. "Mr. Harrington, I've been the vet in this valley for 30 years. You'd be surprised what doesn't surprise me anymore." He continued his examination, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "His heart rate is remarkably steady for an examination. Temperature normal, reflexes." He paused. "Interesting." "What?" Eleanor asked, moving closer. "His reflexes are anticipatory. He's responding to stimuli before I initiate them." Sam sat back on his heels, studying Max. "I've seen something similar in highly trained service dogs, but this is more pronounced." "Meaning?" James pressed. "Meaning he's processing information faster than a normal dog should be capable of." Sam reached for Max's collar again, examining the old tag more carefully. "You said this belonged to your childhood dog? Same name?" "Same everything," James confirmed. "Same white patch on the chest? Same protective instinct?" Sam nodded thoughtfully. "The Blackfeet have stories about spirit, animals returning to complete unfinished business." At Eleanor's skeptical look, he added, "I'm just a vet, Dr. Pierce. I observe and report what I see, even when it doesn't fit neatly into scientific categories." He packed up his equipment. "Whatever's happening with your dog goes beyond my medical expertise, but I'd suggest talking more with Michael. His wife was a knowledge keeper in her community before she passed. If anyone understands what might be happening, it would be him." After Sam left, James stood at the window, watching the late afternoon light filter through the pines. Behind him, Max lay near the fireplace, his eyes never leaving James. "I need to understand what's happening," James said quietly. "Why now? Why the bear? Why is he back after all these years?" Eleanor placed a hand on his shoulder. Then let's go see Michael tomorrow. That night, James dreamed of two dogs running side by side through an endless forest, identical in every way, moving as one, yet somehow separate, protecting, waiting, watching. Michael Blackwood lived in a modest cabin near the ranger station, its weathered exterior blending with the surrounding forest. As James, Eleanor, and Max approached, the old ranger was already waiting on the porch, as if he'd sensed their arrival. "Been expecting you," he said, holding the door open. Inside, the cabin was a testament to a life spent in these mountains, walls adorned with faded photographs, native artifacts, and topographical maps. "Coffee?" Michael offered, already pouring. "Or something stronger?" "Coffee's fine," James replied, noticing how Max immediately settled by the fireplace, completely at ease in the unfamiliar surroundings. Michael noticed too. "He knows he's among friends here." "Michael," Eleanor began, her scientist's skepticism firmly in place, "we're trying to understand what happened with Max. Sam Chen thought you might have some insight." The ranger nodded, taking a seat in a worn armchair. "My wife, Nadia, was Blackfeet. She understood these mountains in ways I never will, even after 40 years patrolling them." He reached for an aged leather map case beside his chair. "She left me this when she passed 5 years ago. Said someday someone would need it." From the case, he withdrew a handmade map of the surrounding wilderness. Unlike official topographical maps, this one featured unusual markings, spirals, circles, and animal symbols at specific locations. "Nadia called these thin places," Michael explained, pointing to the symbols, "spots where the boundary between our world and the spirit world isn't as solid." James leaned forward. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means these locations are permeable. Things can cross over." Michael traced a finger to a specific marking. "This is where your bear encounter happened, one of the oldest thin places in these mountains." Eleanor studied the map with scientific interest despite her skepticism. "These correspond to geological features. Fault lines, unusual rock formations, magnetic anomalies. Nadia would say that's not coincidence," Michael replied. "The physical and spiritual worlds reflect each other." James pointed to the symbol marking his encounter site. "And this means this particular thin place has a guardian, a protector spirit." Michael's weathered face was solemn. "Nadia would say your Max, your original Max, may have had a connection to this guardian. When you were threatened in the same location, that connection allowed him to return, in a sense." "That's not possible," Eleanor said automatically, though her voice lacked conviction. "Perhaps not in your scientific framework," Michael agreed. "But these mountains operate under older rules sometimes." He studied James intently. "The question is why? Spirit guardians don't manifest without purpose. There's something unfinished here." James's phone rang, interrupting the conversation. He glanced at the screen, his expression tightening. "It's my daughter. Again." "You should answer it," Eleanor said quietly. James hesitated, then stepped outside to take the call. Through the window, Eleanor and Michael watched his tense posture as he spoke. "His daughter?" Michael asked. "Sarah. They've been estranged for years," Eleanor explained. "James was never the same after what happened with his father, kept everyone at a distance, including his own child." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "Spirits often return to heal what's broken, not just to protect." When James returned, his face was drawn. "Sarah's coming here. Says she needs to talk to me in person. Something about dreams she's been having." "Dreams?" Michael asked. "About a dog, a German shepherd she never met." James looked down at Max, who had raised his head at the mention of Sarah. "She was born years after the original Max died." Michael exchanged a significant look with Eleanor. "When is she arriving?" "Tomorrow." James ran a hand through his hair. "She sounded frightened." "The circle is closing," Michael said softly. "Whatever began 20 years ago is seeking completion." As they prepared to leave, Michael handed James a small leather pouch. "Nadia made this. For protection in thin places. You may need it. Walking back to their vehicles, Eleanor was unusually quiet. Finally, she spoke. "James, what if, just hypothetically, Michael is right? What if this is about Sarah somehow?" James had no answer, but Max trotted ahead of them with newfound purpose, as if a new phase of his mission had just begun. Sarah. Harrington arrived the next afternoon, her compact car looking out of place beside James's rugged truck. At 28, she had her mother's delicate features, but James's stubborn set to her jaw. The tension between father and daughter was immediate and palpable as she stepped onto the porch, overnight bag in hand. "You look well," James offered. Awkwardly, "You look exactly the same," she replied, then froze as Max appeared in the doorway. "This is Max," James confirmed. "My dog." Sarah stared at the German shepherd, her face draining of color. The white patch on his chest. "It's exactly like in my dreams." Inside, Eleanor had tactfully made herself scarce, leaving father and daughter to their reunion. Sarah couldn't take her eyes off Max, who approached her with unusual gentleness, sitting at her feet and looking up with intelligent eyes. "How long have you had him?" she asked, cautiously extending a hand that Max nuzzled immediately. "About 6 months. Adopted him from a shelter." James watched their interaction with growing unease. "You said on the phone you've been dreaming about a dog like him?" Sarah nodded, reaching into her bag. "That's not all." She pulled out a folder and set it on the coffee table. "I found these in my old storage unit last week. I don't even remember drawing them." James opened the folder to find a collection of childhood drawings, all featuring a German shepherd with a distinctive white chest patch. The drawings were crude, as expected from a child, but the details were unmistakable. The specific pattern of the white marking, a notch in the left ear, even the way the dog stood protectively beside a small figure labeled "Me." "You drew these?" James asked, voice tight. "Apparently when I was 5 or 6. Sarah watched Max, who had moved to sit beside the drawings as if examining them. "Mom said I was obsessed with drawing this dog, even though we never had pets. She thought I had an imaginary friend." James selected one drawing that showed the dog standing between the child figure and a larger, menacing shape. "Did your mother tell you about my childhood dog?" "You had a dog?" Sarah looked genuinely surprised. "Mom never mentioned it. You never mentioned it. His name was Max," James said quietly. "He died when I was 12, years before you were born. He had the same white patch on his chest, same notch in his left ear." Sarah stared at her father, then at the current Max. "That's impossible." "There's more," James said, explaining about the bear attack, the mysterious tag, and their conversations with Michael and Dr. Chen. As he spoke, Sarah's initial skepticism gave way to troubled recognition. "The dreams started 3 months ago. Always the same. I'm in danger, and this dog appears to protect me. Sometimes I'm a child in the dreams. Sometimes I'm my current age. But it's always the same dog." She glanced at Max. "This dog. Have you felt in danger recently?" Eleanor asked, rejoining them with coffee. Sarah hesitated. "I've been having problems with an ex-boyfriend. Nothing physical, but concerning. Enough that I changed my locks." James felt a protective surge he hadn't experienced in years. "Why didn't you call me?" "Because you haven't been part of my life." "For a long time, Dad," Sarah replied, the years of distance evident in her voice. Max suddenly stood, ears alert, and moved to the window. Outside, the afternoon had grown strangely dark, clouds gathering with unnatural speed. "That's not a normal storm," Eleanor observed. A sharp crack sounded from the kitchen, making them all jump. They rushed in to find a framed family photo had fallen from the wall, its glass shattered. James picked it up carefully. It showed him holding a toddler Sarah, both smiling. "I don't remember ever seeing this much of you smiling," Sarah said quietly. As James set the broken frame aside, Max began a low, continuous growl, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the cabin's very foundations. "Something's happening," James said, meeting Eleanor's eyes. "Something's coming." Outside, the wind rose to a howl, bending the pines surrounding the cabin. But beneath that natural sound was something else, something that sounded almost like a distant, furious roar. The storm passed as unnaturally as it had arrived, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. Sarah helped Eleanor prepare dinner while James retrieved his camera equipment from his truck. The camera that had been with him during the bear attack had remained untouched since that day. "I should check if any of the photos survived," he explained, setting the expensive digital camera on the table. "Might give us some evidence of what actually happened." The memory card had remained intact. James powered on the camera, surprised to find the battery still charged. The display lit up, showing thumbnails of the images he'd captured before the attack, distant shots of the landscape, a moose at a stream, early morning mist rising from the valley. "Here," James murmured, reaching the final sequence. These were taken just before the bear appeared. The three of them huddled around the small display. The first images showed the clearing, James testing different angles and exposures. Then came a sequence, capturing the bear's initial appearance at the tree line. "My God," Eleanor breathed. "The size of that grizzly." James advanced to the next image and froze. There at the edge of the frame was a blur of motion, a German shepherd launching toward the bear. "That's impossible," James said. "I didn't even have time to raise the camera when she charged, and Max was still behind me." When the attack started, Eleanor took the camera, studying the image. Could be lens flare or a processing artifact. "Show me," Sarah requested, but when she looked at the same image, her breath caught. "Dad, that's not a blur. That's two dogs." James took back the camera, zooming in on the blur. Sarah was right. The image showed not one, but two German shepherds, identical down to the white chest patches, one slightly transparent as if not fully present. "I don't see two dogs," Eleanor said, confusion crossing her face as she looked again. "Neither do I," James admitted, looking at his daughter with new understanding. "But Sarah does." Max approached, sitting beside Sarah and looking up at the camera. When she showed him the screen, his ears perked forward with recognition. "He sees it too," she whispered. As the night deepened, strange occurrences multiplied. Doors opened and closed on their own. Objects shifted positions when no one was looking. The temperature fluctuated wildly from room to room. Throughout it all, Max remained vigilant, always positioning himself near Sarah, especially when the phenomena intensified. "It's like the cabin is trying to tell us something," Eleanor observed, her scientific skepticism finally giving way to acceptance of the inexplicable. At midnight, they gathered in the living room, none of them able to sleep. James noticed Sarah studying the broken family photo, her expression troubled. "What is it?" he asked. "Mom told me once that you changed. After your father died," she said carefully, "that you became distant, obsessed with capturing dangerous animals through your lens. She said it was like you were looking for something in every predator you photographed." James felt the old defensiveness rise, then deliberately set it aside. "Your mother wasn't wrong. Were you looking for what killed him, or for what saved you?" The question hung in the air, piercing decades of carefully constructed barriers. Before James could answer, Max suddenly stood, hackles raised, staring at the front door. A moment later, headlights swept across the windows as a vehicle pulled up outside. "Are you expecting anyone?" Eleanor asked. James shook his head, moving to the window. A sleek black SUV had parked beside Sarah's car, its engine still running. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out, tall, well-dressed, moving with calculated confidence. "That's him," Sarah whispered, her face pale. "That's Daniel, my ex." "How did he find you?" James demanded, protective instinct surging. "I don't know," Sarah said, backing away from the window. "I didn't tell anyone where I was going." Max's growl deepened, the sound rumbling through the floorboards. James noticed with shock that the dog's eyes seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. his form somehow larger, more imposing than before. A heavy knock sounded at the door. "Sarah," a smooth voice called. "I know you're in there. We need to talk." Outside, the forest had gone completely silent, as if holding its breath. Even the night insects had ceased their chorus. "Don't open it," Eleanor warned. But James was already moving toward the door, Max at his side. "Stay back," he told Sarah quietly. "Both of you." James opened the door to find Daniel smiling thinly, expensive cologne wafting from his tailored suit. The contrast between this urbane figure and the rustic cabin setting couldn't have been starker. "Mr. Harrington," Daniel said smoothly, "I apologize for the late visit. I'm Daniel Mercer, a friend of Sarah's." "Former friend," James corrected. Max stood at his side, unnaturally still, eyes fixed on Daniel with predatory focus. Daniel's gaze flickered to the dog, a flash of something. Recognition? Fear? Crossing his face before his composed expression returned. "May I come in? It's been a long drive." Before James could refuse, Sarah appeared beside him. "How did you find me, Daniel? You're not as careful with your phone location as you think," Daniel replied, his smile never reaching his eyes. "We need to talk privately." "Anything you have to say can be said in front of my father," Sarah stated firmly. Something shifted in Daniel's demeanor, subtle but menacing. "I don't think you want that, Sarah. Some things should stay between us." Max's growl deepened, and James felt the hair on his arms rise at the sound. It wasn't just a dog's warning, it was something primal, ancient. Daniel took an involuntary step back, his composure cracking. "Control your animal." "I don't think he's my animal to control right now," James said quietly, noticing how Max seemed to be growing larger, his form somehow less solid, more fluid in the doorway's shadows. Daniel's hand moved toward his jacket, and Max lunged forward, not attacking, but positioning himself on the porch between Daniel and the door, cutting off access to the cabin. The man stumbled backward, falling against his SUV. "What the hell is that?" he gasped, no longer looking at a normal German shepherd, but something shifting between canine form and shadow. "Leave," James commanded. "Don't contact Sarah again." Daniel scrambled into his vehicle, engine roaring to life. As the SUV sped away down the gravel drive, Max gradually returned to normal form, though his eyes still held an unnatural gleam. Inside, Sarah was shaking. "He's never been violent physically, but there's something wrong with him. The way he follows me, appears places he shouldn't be. It's been escalating." "He won't be back tonight," James assured her, though something told him this wasn't over. Eleanor had been quiet, studying Max with new understanding. "He's protecting Sarah now, not just you," she observed. "The guardian role has expanded." "But why?" James asked. "What's the connection?" Sarah retrieved her portfolio of childhood drawings. "There's something I didn't show you earlier." She pulled out a final drawing, more detailed than the others. A crude but recognizable rendering of a man lying on the ground, a German shepherd standing over him. In the child's handwriting was written, "Grandpa's secret. I don't understand." James said, "You never met my father. He died before you were born." "I know," Sarah replied. "That's why Mom was so disturbed by these drawings. She said I couldn't possibly know about any of this." Eleanor had moved to James's bookshelf, pulling down the wooden box that contained the newspaper clippings about his father's death. "James, was there anything else in here? Anything you haven't shown us?" James frowned. "Just old family documents. My father's will, some photos." "Check again," Eleanor urged. At the bottom of the box, beneath the yellowed clippings, lay a leather-bound journal James had never fully examined. His father's journal. The brittle pages contained sporadic entries spanning several years before his death. One entry, dated 6 months before the fatal incident, caught James's eye. "The wolf appeared again last night, standing at the edge of our property like it's watching over us. Margaret thinks it's beautiful. I know better. It's the same one that followed me as a boy." I rejected it then, and I reject it now. These guardians are a curse, not a blessing. They show you things you don't want to see. When it saved me from the mine collapse, I saw what lay beyond the veil. Never again. James's hands trembled as he read the words aloud. My father had a guardian too, a wolf, that he rejected. Eleanor added quietly, and the night he died, James faltered, memories resurfacing. It wasn't just Max protecting me from an abusive father. Max was protecting me from something that had taken control of him. Sarah placed her hand over her father's. What had taken control of him, Dad? James looked up, understanding finally. Dawning, the same thing that's been following you, the same darkness the bear is carrying. It finds those who've rejected their guardians. Dawn broke with unsettling stillness. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just silence hanging heavy over the forest. James stood on the porch, coffee cooling in his hand, watching Max patrol the perimeter of the clearing with methodical precision. He hasn't rested all night, Eleanor said, joining him. Neither have I. James's eyes were shadowed from lack of sleep. My father's journal changes everything. All these years, I thought I understood what happened that night. Inside, Sarah was still sleeping, exhausted from the emotional revelations and Daniel's appearance. James had called Michael at first light, and the ranger was now making his way to the cabin. The bear in the woods, James said quietly. It's carrying the same darkness that took my father, isn't it? Eleanor, despite her scientific background, no longer hesitated. I believe so. And it's been drawn to Sarah now, using Daniel as a conduit, just like it used your father. Because the guardians follow our bloodline, James concluded. My father had the wolf, I had Max, and now Sarah has both of you, Eleanor finished. You and Max together. The sound of tires on gravel announced Michael's arrival. The ranger stepped out of his truck, face grim, carrying a worn canvas backpack. Max trotted over to him, receiving a respectful nod in greeting. I brought what Nadia left for times like this, Michael said without preamble, following them inside. He spread several items on the kitchen table, a small leather pouch of herbs, a carved wooden box containing what looked like ash, and a stone the size of a golf ball that seemed to glow faintly from within. What is all this? James asked. Protection, boundaries, focus. Michael picked up the stone. This comes from the cave system near where you were attacked. Nadia called it a spirit stone. It resonates with guardian energies. As if in response, Max padded over and sniffed the stone. When Michael placed it on the floor, the dog lay down beside it, resting his muzzle against the smooth surface. Immediately, the stone's glow intensified, pulsing in perfect rhythm with what could only be Max's heartbeat. The stone connects with him, Eleanor observed, scientific curiosity overcoming her fatigue. It connects with both Max's, Michael corrected. Past and present, joined in purpose. Sarah emerged from the guest room, drawn by their voices. Her eyes immediately went to the glowing stone. I've seen that in my dreams, she said, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside Max. When she touched the stone, its light shifted to a warmer hue. Michael nodded approvingly. The connection is strong. 3 generations linked through the guardians. What do we do now? James asked. Daniel will be back, probably with reinforcements, and something tells me the bear, the entity, won't stay in the forest much longer. We don't run, Michael said firmly. These things hunt across distances, across lives. Your father tried to escape his guardian and only made himself vulnerable. The entity found him anyway. So we stand and fight, James said, the decision feeling right despite the danger. But how do you fight something like this? Michael began, arranging the herbs and ash in specific patterns on the table. Not with conventional weapons. This battle happens on multiple levels, physical and spiritual. We need to return to the cave, Sarah said suddenly, her hand still on the spirit. Stone. That's what I keep seeing in my dreams, a cave with ancient markings where the boundaries are thinnest. James and Eleanor exchanged glances. The cave near the attack site, Eleanor confirmed. We found the entrance but didn't explore far. It's a place of power, Michael explained. What Nadia would call a nexus point between worlds. If you're going to confront this entity, that's where it needs to happen. It's dangerous, James protested, looking at Sarah. I can't ask you to. You're not asking, Dad, Sarah interrupted. I'm telling. This involves me too, has since before I was born, apparently. She held up her childhood drawings. I've been connected to this my whole life without knowing it. Max stood, shaking himself as if preparing for action, the spirit stone now glowing steadily without contact. When he moved, the stone rose from the floor, hovering briefly before settling back into his fur, seeming to merge with him. I've never seen that before, Michael whispered, awe in his voice. Outside, the unnatural silence had deepened. Even the wind had died, leaving the pines unnaturally still. Far off, barely audible, came the sound they'd been dreading, a low, rumbling growl that was too deep, too resonant to belong to any natural bear. It's coming, James said, reaching instinctively for his camera bag before stopping himself. This wasn't something to document. This was something to face. Then we prepare, Michael replied, his weathered hands already working with the protective materials. And we stand together. Preparations moved quickly. Michael's decades in the wilderness made him an efficient packer, selecting only essential supplies for their trek to the cave. Eleanor gathered her scientific equipment, not because she believed it would help against a supernatural entity, but because observation was her nature, her way of facing the unknown. James found himself standing before his gun cabinet, fingers hovering over the lock. Conventional weapons won't work against what we're facing, Michael reminded him gently. Maybe not against the entity, James replied, but Daniel is very human and very dangerous. He selected his most reliable hunting rifle, checking it with practiced hands before adding it to their gear. While the others prepared, Sarah sat cross-legged on the living room floor with Max, the spirit stone now hanging from a leather cord around the dog's neck. She'd been quiet since her declaration to join them, lost in thought. "You okay?" James asked, sitting beside her. Sarah pulled an old photograph from her pocket, a family photo James instantly recognized. It showed him, his ex-wife, and a 5-year-old Sarah at a lakeside picnic. What caught his attention was how the image seemed to be changing, the colors shifting subtly, details appearing that hadn't been there before. "It started changing last night," Sarah explained. "Every time I look at it, it's different." James took the photo, watching in astonishment as the scene transformed before his eyes. The background shifted from the lake to a mountain view, then to the cabin's clearing. The positions of the three people changed, sometimes closer together, sometimes farther apart. "It's showing possibilities," Sarah whispered, "lives we could have had if things had been different." One version showed them as a happy family outside this very cabin. Another showed James teaching a teenage Sarah to use a camera. A third revealed them standing together at what appeared to be her college graduation. "Paths not taken," James said, his throat tight. "But not lost forever," Sarah added, her eyes meeting his. "That's what I keep feeling. That this isn't just about fighting something dark. It's about reclaiming something we lost." Eleanor joined them, her scientific curiosity piqued by the shifting photograph. "May I?" she asked, reaching for it. But when she held it, the photo remained static, showing only the original lakeside scene. "You can't see it changing," Sarah realized. "Just like the two dogs in the camera image," James added. "Some things only appear to those connected to this, whatever this is." Michael entered from the porch, his expression grave. "We need to move soon. The forest feels wrong. Animals are fleeing the area." As if confirming his assessment, a flock of ravens burst from the tree line, cawing frantically as they wheeled overhead before heading south. In the underbrush at the forest's edge, smaller creatures darted past, rabbits, foxes, even a young deer, all fleeing in the same direction away from the mountains. "They sense it coming," Michael said. James checked his watch. Nearly noon, though the sky had darkened as if dusk approached. "How much time do we have?" "Not enough to reach the cave before it reaches us," Michael admitted. "We'll have to face it at least once on the journey." Sarah suddenly gasped, staring at the family photo still in Eleanor's hands. Eleanor, seeing nothing unusual, passed it back. Sarah held it up for her father to see. The image had changed completely. Now it showed James, Sarah and Max standing at the cave entrance, facing a shadow that loomed over them. Behind the shadow stood two translucent figures, a woman with kind eyes that James recognized as his mother, and beside her, impossibly, the original Max. "They're waiting for us," Sarah whispered. "They've always been waiting." James felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a burden he'd carried for decades without recognizing it. "I've spent my whole life running from what happened, taking pictures of predators, seeking danger, keeping everyone at a distance, including me," Sarah said softly. "Especially you," James acknowledged, "because you reminded me of everything I'd lost, everything I'd failed to protect." Max approached, pressing, his body against James's side, the spirit stone glowing steadily against his fur. "But I'm not alone anymore," James continued, one hand on Max, the other reaching for his daughters. "None of us are." Outside, the unnatural darkness deepened. In the distance, the sound of an approaching vehicle could be heard. Too loud, too. "Past for the mountain roads, Daniel?" Sarah confirmed, her face set with new determination. "And behind him, something much worse," Michael added, shouldering his pack. "It's time." They moved as one toward the door, Max leading the way, his form already beginning to shift and change as he crossed the threshold into the gathering gloom. They barely made it a mile up the trail before Daniel's SUV screeched to a halt at the trailhead below them. From their elevated position on the switchback, they watched him emerge, no longer alone. 3 men flanked him, their movements stiff and unnatural, faces blank as if sleepwalking. "Those aren't his friends," Sarah whispered. "He doesn't have friends." "They're not fully human anymore," Michael warned, voice low. "The entity has them." James felt for the hunting knife on his belt, a simple tool he'd carried for years. As his fingers closed around the handle, he felt it grow warm, almost vibrating with energy. When he drew it, the blade had transformed, longer, the metal rippling with strange patterns that hadn't been there before, ancient symbols etched into the surface. "Another sign," Michael murmured. "The veil is thinning." They continued upward, Max leading the way, his form shifting with each step, sometimes a normal German shepherd, sometimes something larger, more primal, his outline blurring at the edges. The spirit stone at his neck pulsed with increasing brightness. The trail narrowed as they climbed, the forest pressing close on either side. Eleanor, bringing up the rear, suddenly called out, "They're following us! Moving fast!" No time to reach the cave. James spotted a small clearing ahead where the trail widened before a steep rock face. "There," he directed, "defensible position." They barely had time to set down their packs before Daniel and his 3 companions emerged from the trees below. They moved with unnerving coordination, spreading out to surround the clearing. Daniel's eyes fixed on Sarah, but they weren't his eyes anymore. They were darker, older, filled with malevolent intelligence. "Sarah," he called, his voice layered with another deeper tone beneath it. "You've been running from me for so long, across generations." "That's not Daniel talking," James said quietly, positioning himself beside his daughter. "No," the entity agreed through Daniel's mouth. "The human is just a vessel like your father was, weak, easily occupied when they reject their protectors." Max moved to stand before them, his transformation now complete and visible to all. He stood larger than any natural dog, his form solid, yet somehow luminous, the white patch on his chest glowing like moonlight. When he growled, it resonated through the clearing with harmonic overtones no natural animal could produce. "Two guardians in one," the entity said, sounding almost impressed. "Past and present merged. Clever, but not enough." Daniel raised his hand, and the forest around them darkened further, the air growing dense, difficult to breathe. The three men with him began to change, their forms elongating, fingers extending into claws, eyes glowing with the same malevolence as Daniel's. "Your grandfather rejected his wolf," the entity continued. "Your father tried to forget his dog, and you, Sarah, you've been denying your dreams, your connection to the Guardians. Such a waste." "We're not denying anything anymore," James declared, the transformed knife steady in his hand. As if in response, the largest of the transformed men rushed forward with unnatural speed. Max met the charge, the two forms colliding in a blur of motion and sound. James moved to help, but Michael caught his arm. "Focus on Daniel," the ranger ordered. "He's the main conduit. The others are just extensions." Eleanor had removed scientific instruments from her pack, but now they served a different purpose. "The electromagnetic readings are spiking," she called out. "Whatever's happening, it's centered on Daniel and Max." Sarah stood her ground, eyes fixed on her ex-boyfriend's distorted face. "You've been stalking me my whole life," she said, "not to Daniel, but to what controlled him. Through my nightmares, through him, always at the edges, waiting for me to be vulnerable. Because you're the key," the entity replied. "3 generations, the circle complete. With you, I can break the Guardian's hold permanently." James felt the knife grow even warmer in his hand as he moved toward Daniel. The entity smiled with Daniel's face, unafraid. "Your father tried to fight me too," it said to James. "Before the end, he understood his mistake. Will you understand yours?" Max had dispatched the first attacker, the transformed man dissolving into shadow as the Guardian pinned him to the ground. But the other two were closing in, and Daniel himself began to change, his form swelling, darkening, taking on aspects of the bear that had attacked James in the forest. "Now," Michael shouted, throwing the pouch of herbs toward Daniel, "while the transformation is incomplete." James lunged forward, transformed knife raised, as Max turned to face the true enemy at last. James's transformed blade struck sparks as it collided with Daniel's now clawed hand. The entity had abandoned its human pretense, Daniel's form continuing to warp and expand until it resembled a grotesque hybrid. Part man, part bear, part something older and darker that had no name in the human world. "Your father's blood still stains my essence," the entity growled, its voice no longer remotely human. "Yours will join it today." Max engaged the remaining 2 possessed men, moving with impossible speed between them, his jaws leaving trails of light where they closed on shadow flesh. But for each one he drove back, the entity seemed to grow stronger, drawing their essence into itself. "It's feeding on them," Eleanor shouted, her instruments sparking in her hands. "It's using them as fuel." Sarah stood with Michael, the ranger creating a circle of the ash he'd brought, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision despite the chaos around them. "Stay inside this boundary," he instructed her. "Focus on Max. He needs your connection." The entity threw James aside with casual strength, sending him crashing against a boulder. The ceremonial knife flew from his grasp, embedding itself in the ground halfway between him and Sarah. Eleanor rushed to James, helping him to his feet as blood trickled from a gash on his forehead. "We can't match it physically," James gasped, ribs aching from the impact. "We don't need to," Eleanor replied, understanding dawning on her face as she watched Max. "Look." The German shepherd stood at the center of the clearing, the spirit stone at his neck now blazing like a small sun. Around him, a second form had begun to materialize, the transparent outline of another German shepherd, identical in every detail but composed of pure light. "Both Maxes," James whispered, "past and present." The entity sensed the change, abandoning its attack on James to lunge toward the twin guardians. No! It roared, its bear-like form shifting again, becoming more amorphous, more shadow than substance. You cannot unite what death has separated. Sarah stepped to the edge of Michael's protective circle, her hands outstretched toward Max. But we can, she called out. That's what guardians do. They bridge worlds, connect what's been broken. Energy seemed to flow from her fingers, silvery threads of light, connecting with both the physical and spectral forms of Max. The two canine shapes began to orbit each other, moving faster and faster until they blurred together. James found himself moving toward his daughter, drawn by an instinct deeper than thought. As he crossed the boundary of Michael's circle, the ceremonial knife uprooted itself from the ground and flew to his hand, its blade now glowing with the same light as the spirit stone. The connection must be complete, Michael said urgently. Father, daughter, guardian, all must unite against the darkness. The entity howled in rage and fear, launching itself toward the protective circle. Max, or what Max had become, intercepted it mid-leap. The collision sent a shockwave through the clearing, knocking Eleanor and Michael to the ground. What stood before them now was neither fully the original Max nor the current one, but something transcendent, a guardian in its truest form. Larger than any wolf or dog, its fur rippling with celestial light, eyes containing galaxies of awareness. The spirit stone had become part of it, a blazing core at the center of its chest. The entity recoiled, its shadowy form billowing like smoke in a high wind. "This changes nothing," it hissed, though uncertainty had entered its voice. "I've waited generations. I can wait more." "No," James said, standing tall beside Sarah, the ceremonial knife held between them, both their hands on its hilt. "This ends now." He felt Sarah's consciousness brush against his own, not through words but through images, memories, emotions. The years of separation fell away, the pain of his past no longer a barrier but a bridge. Through their combined awareness, he finally understood what his father had rejected, what he himself had been running from all these years. "The Guardians don't just protect us from external threats," he said, the knowledge flowing through him. "They protect us from ourselves, from the darkness we all carry, from the pain we hide from," Sarah added, completing his thought. The merged Max, Guardian Max, padded silently to stand beside them, forming a triangle with the entity at its center. Power flowed between the 3 points of their connection, visible now as arcs of light that bound the darkness. "You can't destroy me," the entity raged, thrashing against the bonds. "I am eternal." "We don't need to destroy you," James replied calmly. "We just need to face you." With that, he and Sarah stepped forward as one, the Guardian moving with them, all three advancing on the trapped entity with the absolute certainty of those who had finally stopped running from their fears. The first rays of dawn filtered through the trees, illuminating a clearing transformed. Where shadow and chaos had reigned hours before, now an unusual peace settled over the landscape. James blinked awake, momentarily disoriented. He lay on soft earth, Sarah asleep beside him, Eleanor and Michael nearby. The events of the night returned in fragments, the confrontation with the entity, the merging of the two Maxes, the final moment when they had stepped forward together, refusing to run any longer. What had followed defied conventional description. The entity had fought, raged, and finally changed. Not destroyed, but transformed, as they faced it not with destruction, but with acceptance. The darkness that had pursued 3 generations of Harringtons had been recognized, acknowledged, and in that recognition had lost its power. James sat up carefully, muscles aching from exertion and impact. The clearing around them had been altered in subtle but significant ways. The ground where the entity had been trapped now bloomed with wildflowers that shouldn't have been possible in the mountain forest, vibrant, full of life. The air itself felt different, charged with vitality rather than menace. "It worked," Michael said softly, already awake and watching the transformed space with quiet wonder. Nadia always said confronting darkness transforms it. I never fully understood until now. Sarah stirred beside James, her eyes opening to the changed world. "Dad," she murmured. "Are we?" "We're okay," he assured her, helping her sit up. "Everyone's okay." Eleanor joined them, her scientific equipment forgotten as she surveyed the clearing with naked awe. The readings went off the scale and then nothing, like the energy didn't disappear, but transformed into something else. "Where's Max?" Sarah asked suddenly, looking around. As if summoned by her question, the German shepherd appeared at the edge of the clearing, trotting toward them with purpose. He seemed normal again, the right size, solid, no longer the transcendent being of the night before. But subtle differences remained. His eyes held a deeper awareness, and the white patch on his chest now formed a perfect star pattern that hadn't been there before. The spirit stone still hung from his collar, though it had diminished to a small, quietly glowing pebble. When Max reached them, he pressed his head against James's hand, then Sarah's, a gesture of connection and reassurance. "Is he still both?" Sarah asked, running her fingers through Max's fur. "I think he always will be now," James replied, somehow certain of this truth. "Not separated anymore, but complete." They gathered their scattered belongings slowly, no one in a rush to leave the transformed clearing. Daniel and the men he had brought were nowhere to be seen. Not even footprints remained to mark their presence. "What happened to them?" Eleanor asked as they prepared to depart. "Daniel will be found wandering somewhere, with no memory of what happened," Michael said with quiet confidence. "The others too. The entity no longer has use for them." "And the entity itself?" James pressed. Michael gestured to the vibrant flowers covering what had been scorched earth. "Transformed, not gone. Such forces never truly disappear, but changed into something that nourishes rather than consumes." As they hiked back toward the trailhead, James found himself walking beside Sarah, the silence between them comfortable now, rather than strained. "I've been thinking about staying," she said after a while. "Not just for a visit, maybe permanently." James felt an unfamiliar lightness in his chest. "I'd like that." "I never understood why you kept your distance all these years," Sarah continued. "But last night, when we connected, I felt everything. Your fear of hurting me, of the darkness finding me through you. I thought I was protecting you," James admitted. "Instead, I was just continuing what my father started, rejecting connection out of fear." Sarah smiled, a genuine expression that reminded James powerfully of her mother. "Well, now we know better." Ahead of them, Max paused on the trail, looking back as if to ensure they were following. The morning sun caught the spirit stone at his neck, sending prisms of light dancing through the forest. "What will you do about your photography?" Sarah asked. James considered the camera bag he'd left behind at the cabin. "I think it's time for a new subject. I've spent decades capturing predators, trying to understand the darkness. Maybe now I can focus on capturing light instead." As they crested a ridge, the valley spread below them, transformed by morning light into a landscape of possibility rather than threat. For the first time in years, James felt ready to step into that light, no longer alone. The cabin welcomed them back like an old friend, its solid presence a comforting contrast to the fluid reality they'd experienced in the forest. Michael built a fire, while Eleanor prepared a much-needed meal, the domestic activities grounding them after the otherworldly confrontation. James found himself standing on the porch, watching the afternoon sun play across the clearing. Sarah joined him, 2 steaming mugs of coffee in her hands. "I called the university," she said, offering one to her father. "I'm taking a sabbatical from my teaching position. They understand." James accepted the mug gratefully. "What will you tell them about all this?" Sarah smiled. "That I'm reconnecting with family. It's the truth, even if it's not the whole truth." Inside, Max had settled by the fireplace, eyes half closed in well-earned rest. James knelt beside him, gently examining the spirit stone that still hung from his collar. As he did, he noticed something new. A third tag had appeared alongside the two that had started this journey. "Look at this," he called softly. The others gathered around as James carefully lifted the new tag. Unlike the modern tag he'd purchased 6 months ago or the tarnished tag from his childhood dog, this one was neither metal nor plastic. It seemed to be made of the same material as the spirit stone, with a subtle luminescence that shifted with the light. Etched into its surface was a symbol, a perfect blend of a star, matching Max's new chest marking, and a crescent moon. Below it, 3 names were inscribed in flowing script: James, Sarah, and Max. "A binding symbol," Michael explained, examining it without touching. "Nadia would call it a soul mark, a sign of spirits connected across boundaries." "It's beautiful," Eleanor said, her scientific skepticism permanently altered by what she'd witnessed. "I've been thinking about a new research direction. There's so much about animal cognition and connection that conventional science ignores." "You'd be entering controversial territory," James warned, knowing how the scientific community could react to such pursuits. Eleanor's eyes sparkled with newfound purpose. "Good. Science advances at the edges of the unknown, not in the comfortable. Center." As evening approached, Michael prepared to return to his cabin. "The forest will be quiet for a while," he said, gathering his few remaining supplies. "What you 3 accomplished has created a period of balance. But remember, balance always shifts eventually." "And when it does?" Sarah asked. Michael smiled, glancing at Max. "You have a guardian who understands both worlds now. Trust that connection." After the ranger departed, Eleanor announced her own plans. "I'm heading back to my research station tomorrow. There's work to be done, documenting what we can of this experience, finding a framework to understand it." "Will you tell others?" James asked. "In my own way," she replied thoughtfully. "Some truths need to be approached carefully, but I won't hide from them anymore." Later, as night settled over the mountains, James found Sarah in his study, examining his photography collection with new understanding. "All these predators," she observed. "You were searching for answers in their eyes." "Trying to understand the darkness," James agreed, "without realizing I was carrying my own answers all along." "What will you photograph now?" she asked. James considered the question. "There's a project I've thought about for years, but never pursued, documenting the relationship between people and their animal companions, not just pets, but working animals, therapy animals, rescue animals, the connections that transcend the ordinary, guardians in everyday life." Sarah smiled. "Something like that," James acknowledged. "Less dramatic than fighting bears, but maybe more important in its own way." Max padded into the room, the 3 tags on his collar catching the lamplight. He moved between them, creating a physical connection as he had on the mountainside. "He really is both of them now, isn't he?" Sarah said softly, running her hand along Max's back. "And something more," James added. "Something new that belongs to both of us." Outside, a light snow began to fall, unusual for the season but perfect in its timing, a cleansing blanket covering the land. James felt a peace he hadn't known since childhood, before the trauma that had shaped his life, not because the past had been erased, but because it had finally been integrated, accepted, understood. Sarah yawned, the exhaustion of their ordeal catching up with her. "I think I'll turn in." "Good night," James said, then added words that had been too rare between them. "I love you, Sarah." She paused at the doorway, her smile holding decades of waiting. "I love you too, Dad." Max settled between their rooms that night, guardian of the reconnected family. Past and present merged into a future full of newfound possibility. 1 year later, "Guardians, the bonds that transcend," read the banner above the gallery entrance. James stood back, watching visitors move through his new photography exhibit with quiet satisfaction. Each image captured moments of connection between humans and animals, some dramatic rescues, others quiet companionship, all revealing something. Deeper than mere coexistence, Sarah guided a group of students through the collection, her expertise as both teacher and daughter adding depth to the narrative. Eleanor arrived with new research findings, her scientific papers now exploring frontiers. Conventional academia had long ignored. Max sat beside James, the 3 tags on his collar catching the light. In the final photograph of the exhibit, James, Sarah and Max hiked toward a mountain sunrise, and if viewers looked closely enough, 2 faint spectral shapes accompanied them. The original Max and a healed, peaceful version of James's father, visible only to those ready to see. Behind the scenes sat its heart. German Shepherd fights bear to save owner, explores how trauma creates barriers that span generations, and how healing requires confronting rather than fleeing our darkest moments. The supernatural elements serve as externalized manifestations of internal struggles, the bear entity representing unresolved trauma, the guardian spirit symbolizing protective mechanisms and potential for wholeness. The story deliberately balances scientific skepticism with spiritual openness, allowing readers to interpret events through either lens. James's journey from isolation to connection mirrors our collective struggle to remain vulnerable despite past wounds. Sarah's intuitive understanding represents the younger generation's often clearer perception of emotional truths their elders have buried. Max's dual nature embodies the story's central theme, that we are never truly separated from our past selves, and integration rather than rejection of difficult experiences leads to wholeness. By accepting rather than destroying the darkness, the characters transform it, mirroring how personal growth often comes not from eliminating our shadows, but by bringing them into the light of understanding. After watching this film, I finally called my estranged daughter. We're meeting next week. Thank you for showing it's never too late to heal. Richard, 68. My service dog saved me from a house fire last year. This story captured that inexplicable bond perfectly. To Teresa, 54. As someone who grew up with an abusive father, the way trauma was portrayed as both personal and generational resonated deeply. Michael, 62. The scene where James finally sees his father as a victim too brought me to tears. Elaine, 71. My husband and I watched with our German Shepherd between us. By the end, we were all emotional messes. Robert and David, 59 and 63. I felt my childhood dog's presence at critical moments throughout my life. This film made me feel less alone in that experience. Catherine, 57. The balance between scientific explanation and spiritual meaning gave me language for experiences I've never been able to describe. Dr. James Martin, 66, we are humbled by how this story has connected with audiences across generations, giving voice to the mysterious bonds between humans and animals that transcend ordinary explanation.